What's going on, guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel here today. Today we're going to be discussing the role of the back leg, what it is, and how to actually get a decent back leg that's actually going to aid in for you increasing your velocity or just moving better overall on the mount. Now, this has been a topic that has been extremely confusing even for myself in my own career, where over time I was led into industry thinking of firing the hips, loading the heel, sitting, being parallel 90 degrees on my backside, and it was just a complete nightmare. And how I was moving and the results that I was getting from just trying to really force a lot of these patterns. Now, let me be clear, this actually does work for a different size or different percentages of athletes. Now, this does not work for every single athlete out there, and it is exactly why we have steps and systems in place to try to find out what type of leg depth or what type of back leg movement actually works the best with a lot of our athletes. Now, within this video, again, we're going to be going over some of what those strategies kind of look like. Hopefully by the end of this video, you guys gauge a little bit more understanding of the back leg's job, what it does, and how you should actually be thinking about it. Now, before we actually do get started, my name is Anthony Rodriguez, coach and founder of Versatile Athletics. We've helped over 200 plus athletes increase their velocity, move pain-free, while helping them understand how their bodies naturally prefer to move. Now, I am very, very excited though to say that as of 2026, we get 93% of results for our athletes. Now, these results come in velocity increases for athletes throwing 80 plus. On average, we see anywhere from 4.2 to 5.1 in about 3 months. It is pretty exciting. Now, with that said, let's get right back into the video. Okay, now let's simply define what the back leg is, because the back leg is probably not what you think it is. And by what you think it is, you probably just think the back leg is simply just sit down as far back as you can and try to get the hips to fire. Now, that is one way to think about it, but it's not the complete story. To put it as simple as possible, the back leg is literally coil being held through an extended lever of the body that you eventually unwind into front foot strike. That's it, right? Doesn't need to be more complicated. It's just, in other words, loading and unloading of the backside. To what depth that comes into, obviously that varies greatly within everyone, because now we're dealing with athletes' natural movement tendencies. Now, it doesn't mean that the more back leg depth that you get, the harder you're going to throw. The less depth that you get, the least harder you're going to throw. Again, all these things come in different sizes, shapes, and form, depending on what the athlete's natural preferences is, which is something that we directly find out for them, and then we help them understand what this back leg tension or what this back leg depth should be looking like for them. Now, how to determine the role of your back leg in terms of how much depth are you getting, the proper coil, etc., so you can actually fix those things and actually think about them differently. So I would look at 3 things, and these are things that don't really require crazy assessment. So I would look at, number 1, is the athlete matching the slope, right? So obviously we throw on the slope on the mound. So ideally, as you're going down the mound, you cannot just stay straight up. Otherwise, you're going to be landing from an extreme above position, which is going to cause you to slam onto this front leg. Other things that I've seen with athletes like that stay too straight up, they tend to kind of like hop up and jump into the landing phase. Now, again, this looks different for a lot of athletes, but for the most part, for athletes who do try to stay way too high up, we can actually see that. So what we're going to try to find out is, okay, how well is their back leg matching the slope? And what I mean by that is just like, do you have a smooth ride into the landing that is not overly aggressively landed from above or like slamming into that front leg? Now, if the athletes are obviously slamming from above, then we want to incentivize them into, okay, well, we actually need to get a little bit more depth into that backside as we're riding down the mountain in a way that is going to help them land much more smoothly and transfer that energy forward. Number 2 is we want to look at how their back leg is clearing at front foot strike, right? So if they're landing and their back leg is kind of like in this position, it is not at least at a 40, you know, their hips isn't ideally at a 45-degree angle of clearance, or maybe the back leg is still kind of like here, that tells us that there's not much loading or unloading happening into the backside. So with this, we can kind of like tinker with a lot of different things, whether it's either more of a coil on the backside, so we can help these athletes unload all of that energy, or maybe it might be some actual more leg depth so they can actually get into that back hip joint that's going to allow them to unwind forward. Now, lastly, third thing that you want to look at is, are these athletes flying open? So the reason why I say that is because sometimes when athletes don't get the proper movement out of the backside, or no usage of the backside moving forward, they would tend to overcompensate with the front side, trying to pull out open. And I've seen this more happen too when athletes start to fatigue. You would actually see that a lot, where they'll start sending more upright, and then their arms would just kind of like their glove side would start to pull a tad bit early. This is how you know the backside isn't playing a role, because if they were able to use that backside for a little longer time, right, that's going to allow them to buy more time to be in a phase where everything is unwinding naturally into that front foot strike, as opposed to being fairly quick and then the arm is just kind of like trying to rush up to get into that front foot landing. Right now you're buying yourself a little bit more time of that back leg depth. So you can look at those three things, no real crazy assessment, just kind of looking at your own mechanics to kind of understand, okay, where does the back leg kind of need to be. Now, just how I mentioned, the back leg is really just a concept of loading and unloading. Now, loading and unloading can look very, very different for a plethora of athletes, of course. And this loading and unloading could either come in pelvic loading over the femur loading under the pelvis, or it could also come into a pelvic tuck as well. In addition, with a lot of people, which a lot of people miss, it could also come in a form of trunk counter rotation to incentivize the pelvis to stay close. Now, all of these things are affected by athletes' hip anatomy and just anatomy, bony structures in general. Where athletes who have a good amount of hip internal rotation, of course, you can see them get more of that pelvic coil. You can see them get more of that femur coil as well, whichever way will work for them. The tibia also has a role in this, and the ankles as well. But you can think like someone like Devin Williams, that, you know, as they're riding down the mountain, you can see like their femur kind of like be internally rotated. We could also think of like Max Scherzer, how he actually gets into that internal or pelvic coil with the hip. Now, for athletes who actually are very external rotation dominant, kind of like Justin Verlander, where they get this extreme vertical shin, these athletes are still holding tension in a very unique way, right? And whether that may be maximizing the slight little internal rotation that they have, maybe they're overcompensating for it elsewhere. Think about like keeping some of that or assessing some of that internal rotation on the tibia. That's also another way, shape, or form to create torque, because our bodies is made to create torque. Our bodies are elastic bands, if you say, technically speaking more about our muscles that can stretch, contract, and fire. Now, for an athlete like Justin Verlander, for them to hold somewhat of a coil, even if they're not trying to maximize that slight little internal rotation that they have, is they can go on and get this tension or load to unloading from a pelvic tilt, right? So a pelvic tilt would come when the pelvis tucks under their trunk. Now, when the pelvis tucks under their trunk, right, we have their trunk kind of being this flex or maybe kind of. So this is already going to incentivize and hold the body close as long as possible. Now, ideally, as you're matching the slope here, you're creating that tension that we spoke about for you to then unwind into front foot strike. So that's a way that these athletes who don't have a lot of internal rotation can create tension to load and then unload from the backside by being incentivized with the trunk or just a pelvic upward tilt. Now, of course, keep in mind, this is not solely just about the pelvic and then the trunk movement. Your ankle mobility would also be affecting how much back leg depth you're also getting, specifically more the dorsiflexion, right? Because if you have an ankle that you can't really dorsiflex as much, right, you're limited in that range of motion, you're more than likely not going to be able to get into that back leg sitting, whether the knee is more falling over that front leg, like being more quad dominant, or you might have to readjust and be a little bit more glute dominant in that sense. But again, these are things that we find out for our athletes, and then we give them the proper protocols to make sure to inhibit these things and be able to use them on the mount. Now, here are some drills that you guys can actually use to help create tension, that loading and unloading aspect that we've been discussing. For pelvic coil, of like the pelvis kind of coiling over, what we can do is we can do a drill like a U Darvish drill where you're starting with the leg up and then gradually creating that coil over that femur. We can also do hook 'em drills where we're hooking over that front leg over our backside, and all that we're feeling here is kind of like this pelvic coil, and then we use that coil to ride down the mountain, load, and then unload as well. Now, something else that is also widely missed is just hitting as well. Like if you look at hitters, right, hitters would naturally already do that loading and unloading pattern. So something that you can do is you can grab a PVC pipe, get on the mound, and actually mimic your delivery through different drills, or actually just your mechanics as a whole, to create some of that loading and unloading aspect. That would also be great for you to get taught how to incentivize the trunk to be able to hold that tension over as well. Now, also, if you want to get more effect from these drills, you can always tie up a core velocity belt from behind the back, to where you can actually get this pelvic to feel that coiling aspect that we've also been discussing in here. Now, if your form of back leg tension is getting a pelvic tuck, what I would like to do, or drills that I would give up to some of those athletes, will be a swing and leg lift, where you're gathering or you're swinging that leg up as high as you can, tucking that pelvis under, and then creating that tension as you're riding down. You can also exaggerate the lift, like kind of like Sandy Koufax, how he'll lift the leg super high. Obviously, like, do this to as, you know, best as you can. Don't try to like overdo it and pull something. But Sandy Koufax will like lift his leg up this high, and that will naturally already get athletes into that pelvic coil that they can use to go and get down and out the mountain. Again, the main thing that we're trying to do here is just create some type of tension to unwind as the athletes are going to go into this landing position. Now, the back leg flexion, we also want to be making sure that these athletes are matching the slope and they're not staying stuck back. Now, if we're trying to train the back leg depth-wise, here are 3 drills also that you can do. And number 1 would be chair sit-down drills. So what we're going to do is we're going to place up a chair out in front of us, like kind of like mid-stride. And all we're going to do is kind of like do like a rhythm thrower mimic, where we're going to sit down wherever that chair is set up, right? Ideally midway, maybe somewhere like 1/4 of the stride. And then we're going to sit down and then go back up. And then as we're going down and out the mountain for the second time, we're actually going to throw this time. But from the first time that we sat down, we're going to get that feeling, and we're almost going to try to chase that feeling. Now, your body will let you know how much back leg flexion is good and how much is not. Because if you get into the point where like you're not trying this leg and it's just kind of like staying here because of so much back leg flexion, you cannot rotate. And obviously that will be your cue to maybe have a little bit higher box or a little bit higher chair, where you can actually feel that tension and that depth as well simultaneously. Now, another dynamic drill here that you can do is a rocker steps drill. So for this drill, you're going to start out kind of like a Y stance, where ideally you think like your hinge is going to be. From here, we want to kind of like step back, kind of like loading up that back leg. So we've already taught the body like, hey, this is kind of like where we want you to be, where you feel comfortable. From there, you kind of wind up that tension, and then you're going to chase that same exact feeling back again. Last drill here will kind of be a wall hinge drill, where you're going to go get close to a wall. You're going to put your hand out in front, and you're going to lift the leg, and then all you're going to feel is kind of like feel that drop as you're holding yourself on against this wall. This is going to be a good constraint because it's going to give you an environment where you can actually slow yourself down and actually explore around to feel what back leg depth feels good enough for you. Now, lastly here, for matching the slope, you can use these 2 drills. I love them. But these 2 drills will be, you can use a PVC pipe for a slope feel. And with this PVC pipe, you're going to start it off in a height that obviously makes sense, and it's a height that your hips or the back leg can kind of like skim through without feeling uncomfortable. Now, you're going to be using this on the mountain. You can also use it on flat ground if you wish, but all you're going to be doing is you're going to be tracing the route of this PVC pipe going down. That's going to give you a better feel of what matching the slope is like, because obviously the slope is going down, so you want to get that same exact feel. And then second drill would be a met ball slope feel drill, where you're going to have a met ball out here in front of you. All you're going to do is ride out, ride down and out in front, And of course, that's also going to give you another constraint of feeling what it's like to kind of be in the back leg, get depth as you're riding down the mountain in a controlled environment, not something where you can obviously just get lost. So you can play around with what these things feel like for you guys. Now, that is all that I have for you guys. Hopefully everything in here is applicable for you guys. Again, no claims on that none of these things will work. We do assess all of our athletes to understand what they're lacking with and understand their natural movement tendencies. That way we can give them exactly what they need to make sure that we move the needle forward for them as quickly as possible. And if you want a more direct approach with this, feel free to book a call with us down below in the description, where we can talk about what you guys are struggling with, where you guys are currently at, and see if you guys are a great match for our program. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.